We need one right here.
Two. Where's this person has, right? This person.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Ooh.
Way to
Ooh.
go.
I got the eye.
Do you need a pencil too? Yeah. Just put it.
Oh, above here.
Yeah, just up in the corner. Toss that on top. Perfect.
All right.
Meeting of the committee will please come to order. We're here today for a hearing, and before we even call our witnesses in the room, we're going to recognize members for opening statements. Mr. Pallone, are you prepared for your opening statement? Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first thank you all for, well, I was going to say thank all the panel, but they're not here yet, so I'll forego that. The U.S. Climate Action Partnership has shown tremendous leadership in calling for national legislation to slow, stop, and reverse the growth in greenhouse gas emissions in the immediate future. It's encouraging to see such a broad coalition of leaders from the energy industry, financial services, and the environmental community working together to reduce carbon emissions. Everyone here understands the serious threat global climate change represents to the world. The fourth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicted serious risks and damages to species, ecosystems, and human infrastructure if action is not taken to reduce emissions. It's time for Congress to pass legislation that will set the necessary emission reduction targets and will ensure that we meet those targets in the short and long term. We can't afford to wait another year to act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pallone. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it my understanding that we have 1 minute opening statement?
No, we're giving members 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You don't have to take 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the Chairman for having this hearing today with testimony from the United States Climate Action Partnership. I might note that last night I was looking at the website of the partnership, and I noticed that a few months ago they conducted a poll in 46 swing congressional districts. And in that poll, they asked the question of whether or not stringent climate change enforcement efforts should be taken in the United States, even though action would not be taken in China and in India. And that raised an interesting question in my own mind, because with the economy being what it is today, not only in the U.S. but around the world, I think if there's ever a time that we have to be cognizant and aware of additional cost to produce electricity, to produce energy, it is today. And particularly so if other countries are not taking the necessary steps to address this issue as well. So I would also point out that I was reading an article in the New York Times just recently, and it was talking about the cap-and-trade system in Europe. And it points out that in Europe, which created the world's largest greenhouse gas market 3 years ago, early evidence suggests the whole approach could fail. It specifically says that this week the European Environment Agency reported that emissions from factories and plants that trade pollution permits rose in 2006 over the previous year, and it also rose the first 2 years of the operation of the cap-and-trade system. So while the U.S. The U.S. Climate Action Partnership is a strong advocate for some of these programs, I think that at this particular time in the history of our country, with the economy being what it is, we have to move cautiously to reflect upon the additional cost that anything we might do will bear on production of energy. And if the U.S. has an undue amount of that cost, then it certainly will place us at an economic disadvantage with other developing economies around the world. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman for his opening statement. Ms. Capps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing with the U.S. Climate Action Partnership. My remarks will be limited to a minute, but I do want to thank these companies and organizations for their blueprint for legislative action and to let them know that it makes an important contribution to helping solve the global warming problem. Our witnesses agreed that now is the time for action. They agree on the creation of a mandatory economic-wide program to address global warming. They also agree on a more aggressive emission reduction schedule with significantly narrowed ranges. What is more, the companies and groups before us today also make clear that by acting now, we can help and not hurt the economy. Through global warming legislation, we can drive the development of new technologies. We can create new American jobs, and we can support workers in the transition to a green economy. It will be a challenge to enact meaningful legislation, but it can be done, and I join you, Mr. Chairman, in supporting that notion. We must face the challenge of global warming now. It is one of the great challenges of our generation. And with the help of groups and businesses like those in the Climate Action Partnership, this is a challenge we can and we will meet. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses and to passing the strongest global warming bill that we can. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Capps. Mr. Shimkus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A terrible start to hopefully a better year. It started yesterday. Now we're faced with a preparation time of 1 minute, now granting 5. My complaints yesterday was that it's important for USCAP to hear our comments. Of course, they are not here, and I understand they're doing a press conference. So it's more important for USCAP to do a press conference, probably with the vast majority of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, versus hearing the concerns of over 670,000 people in my congressional district about how global climate change will cost jobs. I'm going to hold the fossil fuel Democrats accountable. If there's any place you're going to be held accountable in this Congress, it's going to be in this committee. So if you're from a coal-producing state or a petroleum-producing state, you better get prepared to defend your votes, as global climate change will destroy the fossil fuel industry. So I'm just giving you notice. If on the floor we can't get these amendments on the floor, you will be held accountable in this committee if we proceed through regular order on the movement that will destroy coal in this country. It will destroy crude oil production in this country. So be prepared for a battle. Can't address USCAP, they're not here. It's interesting, in their first release of their report, guess what they have? It's not in the new one. We only got this, this was released an hour and 15 minutes ago. In their first release, what do they have as a picture in their portfolio? They have a trading floor. A trading floor. My question is, why is that trading floor no longer in this report? You know why? Because we're bailing out Wall Street, because of traders who abuse the system. Let's develop, this is a great idea, let's develop a trading floor for U.S. emissions. And let's let the big money folks at Goldman Sachs control it. Is that a great idea? In this environment, that's what's being proposed. I've talked in this committee numerous times about a carbon tax. At least it's honest. Because climate change does a simple premise. It monetizes carbon. It puts a value to carbon, and someone is going to pay that cost. Now, the cap and trade system is a shell game to hide the cost from the ultimate person who's going to pay. And who is that person who's going to pay? The person who's going to pay is the individual consumer, because industry is going to pass those costs on. Great idea in a struggling economy. So the best thing we can do to help the economy move forward is increase the cost of energy. When we can only be competitive in a worldwide environment if we have low-cost fuel. We saw part of this recession is because we don't have a diversified fuel portfolio. We have been sending signals to the fossil fuel industry that we do not want to use your low-cost fuel. And what has happened? The supply and demand curve increased the cost. Now we have low-cost fuel. Why? The economy's in a recession. Do we want to continue to move in that direction? This, my friends, guarantees it. Guarantees rural America, coal-producing states, more job loss. How do I know this? It's happened. Go back to the Clean Air Act. Go back to my congressional district. Go back to the numerous coal mines. I've got a picture being sent to me in Kincaid, Illinois. Great picture. All these miners, all these equipment, all these facilities, no longer there. Closed. And I know those folks who are from coal-producing states understand. And again, I appreciate this extra time, Mr. Chairman. I feared that giving USCAP the opportunity to roll this out in a press conference instead of hearing the concerns from the people in my congressional district is a terrible, terrible, bad start on a very important issue that will take bipartisan activity. And I will again just put my fossil fuel Democrats on record. They know the work we did in the last Congress of raising the issue of coal on the floor of the House. With new rules, we may not get that chance. I can guarantee you, coal, you will get a chance to vote in support of coal as this legislation moves forward. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Harmon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say to you that I appreciate the opportunity to give a brief opening statement. I think it will afford, especially our new members, a chance to put their views out. And I know, based on your history, that you will conduct this committee in a way that does give the newest members an opportunity to be heard. So as a fairly old member, I want to thank you on their behalf. One of my children's favorite books was called It's a Terrible, Terrible, Very Bad Day by Judith Viorst, a wonderful Washington writer. Unlike Mr. Shimkus, I don't think it's a terrible, terrible, very bad day. I actually think it's a pretty terrific first hearing for this committee, and I look forward to being back when our witnesses will testify and to putting a few views forward. USCAP is a partnership between public policy nonprofits and the private sector, and I want to say that, in my view, public-private partnerships can work, and the model is an excellent one for us to use as the basis for legislation, critical legislation that we are going to be embarked on in the energy area. This committee, for example, helped broker a public-private partnership on a range of energy efficiency issues in our 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act. Congressman Upton and I were extremely active on one of those partnerships regarding energy efficiency, energy-efficient light bulbs. We worked with leading environmental groups like the NRDC and the lighting industry, including Philips and Mr. Immelt's General Electric. It wasn't an easy process. The parties started negotiations very far apart, but with lots of work and the willingness of all sides and both sides of the aisle on this committee to listen respectfully to each other, we managed to craft groundbreaking legislation. We banned the 100-watt incandescent light bulb and required all lighting sold in the United States to be 30 to 40% more efficient than it is today by 2014 and 300% more efficient by 2020. We laid the groundwork for bringing lighting manufacturing back to the U.S. and to overcoming concerns about mercury, which is in some of the existing light bulbs presently produced. I think that our public-private partnership can be a model for future legislation, including legislation on the subject of climate change, and I think that USCAP will help us craft legislation that is both far-reaching and driven by consensus. I hope this committee and our witnesses will use the public-private partnership model as we move forward, and again, I thank you for the opportunity to put my views out there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shattuck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by expressing my support for the comments made by my colleagues, Mr. Whitfield and Mr. Shimkus. I think we ought to talk about the procedure for this hearing because I am deeply troubled by it, and I won't make a judgment call as to whether it's fair or appropriate. I'll let the public and the people in this room make that judgment call. To my knowledge, this is the first time that in a routine hearing before this committee, members have been compelled to give their opening statement without the witnesses present. That is one of the opportunities where we as a member of the committee get an opportunity to express ourselves to the full panel about an issue. It was a concern expressed in yesterday's debate about the denial of opening statements to the members of the panel. But today, I don't get the chance to make my concerns about this issue apparent to the members of the panel during an opening statement. Instead, as Mr. Shimkus noted, they are holding a press conference, I understand, over in the Cannon Building, where they can't hear me express either my concerns or the concerns of my constituents about the issue. Point one. Point two, the minority was told that it could not have a minority witness on this panel. If it wanted a minority witness or a minority panel, it had to have it on a separate panel, and they had to be prepared to talk about this report, which was issued only, as my colleague Mr. Shimkus noted, an hour and 15 minutes ago. Pretty difficult to ask a witness to come before a United States Congressional Committee and be prepared to answer questions about a report that they have for only an hour and 15 minutes. And so the minority declined to have any witnesses. I think that's a stifling of the minority's rights. Next, we are told that these witnesses will have a very limited time. Indeed, that the distinguished CEOs who will be here, the chairman of ConocoPhillips, the chairman of Duke Energy, the chairman of Exelon, or president and CEO of Exelon, the chairman and CEO of General Electric, the president and CEO of NRG, the chairman and president of PG&E, the chief executive of Energy Rio Tinto, the president and CEO of Siemens, all are on a very limited time period, and they can arrive here at 10 or 10:30, but we'll have to leave by 12:30. So therefore, Congressman Shadegg, it's highly unlikely you'll get a chance to ask them any questions, but certainly Mr. Gingrey, at the bottom of this dais, will not get to ask them any questions. Again, a repression of the ability of the minority to express its views, forget majority, just of congressmen, to express their views to the members of the panel. I am deeply troubled by that. I share Mr. Shimkus's concern about the effect of carbon cap and trade on this economy. I worry about its impact on jobs. I would like to, on the substance of this hearing, make the point that I believe we need to act prudently. There are many things that we can do right now to reduce greenhouse gases that will have two benefits, not just one. There are other things that we could do right now to reduce greenhouse gases that will have only one benefit and will have a significant cost. Let me explain that. If we as a Congress were to require dramatically more efficient buildings in this country, buildings that were built by landlords who didn't care about how efficient they were, to make them more efficient, that would both reduce greenhouse gases and reduce our consumption of energy in general and reduce our consumption of foreign oil. Good policy, two benefits. If we were to do the same with homes, two benefits: reduce greenhouse gases and reduce our consumption of energy and our consumption of foreign oil. Same with more efficient automobiles, alternate vehicles, alternate fuels, wind fuel, solar. There are lots of things we can do that will have two benefits. It will reduce greenhouse gases and also reduce our use of energy in general and reduce our reliance on foreign countries, some of whom are not our friends, for energy, period. But we don't get to discuss that today because we're only discussing cap and trade. Cap and trade, I would suggest to you, is a single benefit strategy. It will not reduce our consumption of energy. It will not reduce our consumption of foreign oil. But I don't get to tell the executives who are coming here any of that because I don't get that chance. I want them and their lobbyists to know that I intend to submit questions in writing to them to find out if those CEOs came here by corporate aircraft, if they have calculated the carbon footprint of their corporate aircraft, if they know how much it will cost their company to buy the carbon credits to keep all of their corporate aircraft in the air, and if they are willing to report that cost to their stockholders in their annual report, so that, as Mr. Shimkus points out, the cost of buying these cap and trade permits, which is going to be borne by the American public and is going to cost us jobs, is known. I agree with Mr. Shimkus. A straightforward carbon tax would tell the American people what this costs. A cap and trade system is designed to hide that from the American consumers, and the American consumers deserve the truth. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Just for the record, the members should know the following. The purpose of a hearing is to hear what the witnesses have to say, not to tell the witnesses just what we have to say. But we will have an opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses or their designees if some of the CEOs cannot stay. So members are not going to be denied the opportunity to be questioned. Members are not going to be denied the opportunity to question or make statements to the people from USCAP.
Would the chairman yield?
And let me just finish this other point. We did not set any criteria for minority witnesses that they had to say this or they had to say that. We had no requests for minority witnesses. This is not the last hearing on the issue, and we certainly are going to have many witnesses with many points of view. Who asked me to yield?
Mr. Chairman. But it is true that many of these, the titans of industry, are leaving at 12:30, so the individual CEOs who we may want to ask questions of will not be there.
That's correct, and that was an understanding we had with Mr. Barton, because they are not going to stay, each of them, for the whole hearing. but there will be their designees to answer questions who are very familiar with their proposal.
And with all due respect, I don't want to talk to the designee. I want to talk to the CEOs. I yield back.
Okay. Let's see. Gentlewoman from California, Ms. Matsui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you very much for calling today's hearing. I applaud your leadership and vision on this critical and pressing issue. I'd also like to commend Chairman Markey on his tireless work focusing our attention on the problem of climate change. I'm eager to work with both of you and with all my colleagues on this committee and on the Energy and Environment Subcommittee. In my hometown of Sacramento, we live at the confluence of two great, beautiful rivers. The constant threat of flooding makes it even more urgent than ever that we address the issue of climate change. Unless we take action now, our way of life in Sacramento, in California, and across this nation will be changed forever. I look forward to hearing from each of today's witnesses about how we can advance solutions that are effective, innovative, and efficient. Again, thank you for your leadership on this issue, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to cover a couple of points. I had the opportunity, as did several of my colleagues last summer, to spend an evening with some of these CEOs talking about their ideas and their proposal for cap and trade. And I remember asking the CEO of General Electric at this dinner, I said, and the others, I said, now, in order for a cap and trade system to work, you have to price energy higher than it is today. And they all agreed with that. And I said, well, you have some of the smartest financial people in the world working for your companies. How much more does energy have to be priced at to create a trading market? And they hemmed and hawed a bit, and I threw out the idea of like $20 to $25 a ton of carbon, which I think is what it trades for in Europe. And they didn't disagree with that. And I said, so the price of energy will naturally be higher once you assume you have to have a higher price to create a market to trade in, and they agreed. And I said, so if the price of energy is higher as a result of the policy that Congress adopts, and I'm supposed to go home and sell to my constituents, is good for them and for the country and the globe, then would each of you, and I would ask them this today if I get a chance, commit in your companies not to chase cheaper energy elsewhere in the world for your manufacturing? I think that's a pretty simple request. None of them would commit to that and said so. So it strikes me as odd that at a time when our country is facing unprecedented economic problems, that we have these CEOs asking for higher energy costs, but unwilling to commit not to chase cheaper energy elsewhere in the world for manufacturing. That bothered me a lot. Now, I'm not sure what they're about, tell you the truth. I do know as I look at the people who are involved, they're very, very respected people and companies. But I also recognize some names that, frankly, the taxpayers are having to bail out right now, like AIG. And many of these companies, I think, would benefit from whatever happens in a cap-and-trade proposal, especially if you are a trader. And in meetings I've had overseas with some of the European leaders and all, it seemed to me over time the people most aggressively advocating a cap-and-trade system were those who were going to be trading in it. And it bothers me because when we look at what we're going through right now because of the way debt was traded and derivatives and all of those new instruments we're learning about, and the utter collapse of our economy as a result, it perplexes me that we're going to create, in theory, a new system of cap and trade by driving energy costs higher with no guarantee jobs won't go overseas. Now, having said that, I'm proud to come from the state of Oregon. I'm probably the only member of my congressional delegation that drives a hybrid in Washington and one in my home district. And I believe in conservation and recycling. It's part of our heritage as Oregonians. And I think we've done a lot in the last 9 years or so on improving the environment. Renewable fuels, for example, since 2001, is a 500% increase by 2022. Vehicle fuel economy, a 40% increase will occur by 2020. Lighting efficiency, many of us on this committee have supported the bipartisan effort to improve lighting. 25 to 30% lighting efficiency improvement by 2012 to 2014 and 70% by 2020. Appliance efficiency standards up 45% since 2001. Federal government operations, bigger than most countries, by the way, just what operates in the federal government. We've already put in place a 30% efficiency and 20% renewable fuel use by 2015. Renewable power, 26 states now have that requirement. It's a 500% increase to date. Building codes, we've already said, federal government promoting new 30% model code. There are many things that we're doing that I think we can be proud of as this country in reducing our carbon emissions, in improving our efficiency, reducing our use of energy. But the thing that remains here is there is no viable no viable carbon capture and storage technology readily available on the commercial market today. And I'll get into that more later on, I hope. But before we create new standards and requirements, we better make sure we understand what's going to happen to our economy and what technology is available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Walden. Ms. Christensen.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Waxman. And let me take this opportunity at our first official hearing to say what an honor it is to have been selected to serve on Energy and Commerce. And I look forward to a productive tenure on this committee working with you and my colleagues to address issues that come under our jurisdiction that are some of the most challenging in our nation. And climate change is one of these, and perhaps considered the greatest challenge facing the world today. In my district, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the entire Caribbean region, we're very concerned, of course, about its impact on sea levels, changing weather patterns, and most importantly right now, the bleaching and loss of our coral reefs that are so important to our food, the health of our sea resources, the livelihood of some of my constituents, and our tourism-based economy. As a physician, a member of the Health Subcommittee, and someone who's worked for a long time on national health care issues, the predicted impacts of climate change on health are also frightening, especially because the troubling trends have already started, and we have not, as a nation, taken any meaningful steps to reduce greenhouse gases and global warming. So I look forward to the testimony of the partnership and the members who are going to be here with us today. Not surprisingly, cap and trade is a cornerstone of their recommended strategy. I would be very interested, though, in our panelists' comments and opinions on another proposal that I've recently learned about and which I find very intriguing, caps and dividends. And so I applaud the diversity of the partnership and the hard work that I know it must have taken to reach consensus on their call for action. And I look forward to their testimony and working with them and you on these important issues.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christensen. Mr. Terry? Who's next? Does it go this? Oh, yes. Gentlelady
from Tennessee, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to thank you for the hearing today, and I will be pleased that the witnesses are here to visit with us today. I join my colleagues in wishing that they would be able to stay and answer some of the questions that we have that are specific to the issue and specific to how their industries are planning to address this issue. Just a couple of thoughts. Number one, I'm one of the ones on this committee that still has very serious reservations about the plans that we're hearing from the new president, what he is contemplating to stop the growth of greenhouse gases. I think that we have to look at some of the data that is coming in that addresses the issue of climate change and also certainly of cooling. I've found it very interesting that England, for example, recently has experienced temperatures 2 degrees Celsius colder than Antarctica, and that they've had an average temperature in 2008 that was 1 degree Celsius less than 2007. So when we hear the talk of global warming and we experience what we have experienced in my home state in Tennessee with colder temperatures, and we hear data such as this, it does cause us to question the global warming science. Secondly, the mandatory reduction in emissions on greenhouse gases through the cap-and-trade system. I think that the more we talk to those in business and industry, the more we see the impact that this is going to have and the negative impact that this is going to bring to our economy, the transfer of wealth from industries and consumers to companies that are promoting inefficient and inadequate technologies, essentially picking winners and losers in the free market. The European emissions trading system, when you look at that trading scheme, as they call it, and Mr. Chairman, I find that very appropriate, using the word, the trading scheme, it provides, in my opinion, ample evidence of how companies game the system for their benefit. But even if the weaknesses of a cap-and-trade system are addressed, it will still reduce the availability of energy and drive up the cost of economic development, which is something we're actually trying to reduce right now. So this is not only counterintuitive, it appears that it will be counterproductive in many ways. I also have concerns, and I know we're not addressing this specifically in this hearing, but it is a related issue about the EPA regulating and moving to regulate greenhouse gases and the monster of a bureaucracy that would require, and the need to get permits for everything from cows to schools to churches for greenhouse emissions, and the economic slowdown that this would cause if we were all sitting around waiting for the EPA to issue a $175 tax per cow or $20 tax per hog for our agricultural interest in our states. This just seems like a very cumbersome and counterproductive bureaucracy. So we have plenty on our plate today, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the hearing. I hope that it is a robust discussion of issues, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. The next would be the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just express what an honor it is to serve on this committee that deals with so many seminal issues at this crossroads in history. I'd like to begin by offering my thanks to Chairman Waxman for holding this hearing today. I'm excited to have an opportunity to work with the members of this committee and organizations like USCAP to address the issues of climate change. Climate change is a very real and very pressing issue facing this country, and we as members of Congress have a responsibility to address it. What remains is the question of how to answer the call to action in a responsible fashion that both lowers our nation's damaging emissions and protects the ability of our economy to grow. I believe that it is a goal that all of the members of this committee share and one we can work together to achieve. I'm greatly encouraged by the work of USCAP in assembling some of the foremost energy producers and strongest advocates for environmental protection in the nation to proactively address this crucial challenge. I look forward to the testimony today and applaud the participating members of USCAP for their progressive, cooperative, and aggressive approach to this critical issue. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Space. Mr. Gingrey?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I join my new member colleagues in expressing my gratitude and excitement about serving on the committee and this being the first opportunity to utter any words on the committee. I hope they won't come across as sounding too negative, because certainly that's not my intent. But I do have some concerns both in regarding process and policy. And I would like to voice my strong concerns, first off, about the process by which today's hearing has been conducted by the majority. The mission statement of the United States Climate Action Partnership pledges that the organization will work with Congress on these critical environmental issues. I am deeply troubled that despite this pledge, the majority has elected to give the members of this committee almost no time to digest the recommendations made by USCAP on climate change, although I firmly believe that the committee should not be dismissive, and certainly I'm not, of their report. Mr. Chairman, I believe that we would be better served by the information given to members and staff less than 90 minutes ago if we were to hold this hearing on a future date. With more time, members could properly analyze and scrutinize the important work of USCAP so we could have a more engaging and productive hearing. Unfortunately, due to what seems to me like the political expediency of this organization for the majority, we will not have that opportunity for the American people. So much of my concerns then for the process. In regarding policy, you know, this cap and trade, which is going to be the focus of the hearing, and we heard Mr. Whitfield earlier explaining the lack of really meaningful progress in the European nations over a 2 or 3 year period regarding cap and trade, where greenhouse gases have not been reduced. And I would hate to see cap and trade go the way of wetlands mitigation, community service in lieu of jail time, and some of these other things that sound so great on paper that really don't work out in the long run. You know, in the report that we just got, I see in the prologue, it says, in January 2007, we issued our call for action in which we joined together to call for prompt enactment of national legislation in the United States to slow, stop, and reverse the growth of greenhouse gas emissions over the shortest time reasonably possible. Now, that was in January 2007. I was a member of the Science Committee at that time. Our first hearing of the year was the Honorable Nancy Pelosi. Our second hearing of the year, and it was a joint hearing with this committee, was former Vice President Al Gore. Our economy was far different in January in 2007 than it is today. But USCAP goes on in this report to say today, U.S. leadership is essential for establishing an equitable and effective international policy framework for robust action by all major emitting countries. For this reason, action by the United States should not be contingent on simultaneous action by other countries, i.e. China and India. I say to my colleagues, and I'll wrap it up with that, Mr. Chairman, that there are no Pacific island nations in immediate danger of being underwater because of global warming and the rise in the sea level. But there are many economies, many companies, General Motors, Chrysler, et cetera, who are underwater today. And I think we have a real crisis in our economy, and this may not be the time for the United States to take that kind of a chance. Let's take this slow, and let's listen to what these folks have to say today, but let's don't jump to action too quickly, maybe like we did in the $800 billion bailout. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing and for getting us off to a quick start on an incredibly critical issue before this country and, frankly, the world at large. I'm truly honored to be a part of this body where we're going to seek solutions for these complex issues that face us as a nation, and certainly as a representative from Ohio that face my constituents. This is critically important to have these folks here today so that we can learn more about the members from the U.S. Climate Action Partnership and about how they think we can best advance our nation's energy policy. USCAP's alliance, which includes major industrial and energy companies and environmental groups, demonstrates that business interests and environmental interests can work together to pursue policy that will meet the multidimensional challenge before us. I'm encouraged by USCAP's efforts to work together as we discuss policies that will both protect our environment and spur the development of advanced technologies and jobs. Make no mistake, it's critical that we find ways to effectively address global warming. and I'm looking forward to finding the right solutions that will concurrently preserve and create jobs for today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sutton. The chair wishes to recognize the chairman emeritus of the committee, Mr. Dingleford.
When we find that we have the large number of both NGO heads and the heads of American businesses coming together. I would like to point out also that the directors of Edison Electric Institute endorsed a set of points of agreement on climate change last week. All of this points to one fact. Climate change is recognized as being the most critical climate issue facing us by everybody involved. When the USCAP's call to action was released, it made news, as well it should. For the first time, a diverse group of entities who oftentimes are at odds on environmental matters agreed on the critical need for action on climate change. The call to action calls for federal climate change legislation to follow 6 key principles. However, for the most part, it does not get into the level of detail necessary for a complicated legislative resolution to the problem. Today, USCAP released a more detailed set of recommendations. While we have not yet had the opportunity to delve into these recommendations, I do look forward to hearing more about them when our witnesses appear today. As earlier stated, Mr. Chairman, climate change is the most critical environmental issue facing us. Last Congress, we held a number of hearings, issued a number of white papers on the subject of climate change, and in fact, Mr. Boucher and I put forward draft legislation that was written specifically to address the 6 goals in the call to action. All of this was intended to set us up for prompt action this year. This hearing builds upon that record. I look forward to working with you and all my colleagues to address climate change in a manner which achieves reduction amounts the scientists agree is necessary while protecting domestic jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Mr. Rush?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to commend you for holding this hearing, thus quick starting our activities of this committee on this very, very important issue. Mr. Chairman, I think that we're going to be well served by the esteemed panel that you have assembled for today, and I certainly want to thank each and every one of them for making such an appearance before this committee. Among those who will be testifying today is my good friend, Mr. John Rowe, who is the president and the CEO of Exelon. I have worked with Mr. Rowe on many energy-related issues, and I find him to be a very hard-working and innovative and forward-thinking individual. I look forward to hearing his remarks regarding the innovative and very, very excellent practices that Exelon has adopted in becoming an industry leader in the production of and the distribution of clean and renewable energy sources. I would also like to say that I look forward to hearing from all of our distinguished panelists as they seek to rally the Congress as well as the other industries to move us all forward in developing cleaner energy policies and technologies that we sorely need for the continuing success of our economy and of our future as a nation, and indeed of the world's population. I look forward to hearing them outline the steps that their own companies have enacted in order to move this nation forward in that direction. And Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I just want to again thank you for gathering us together so that we can have a great beginning as we initiate this 111th Congress. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Mr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing briefing that we're having this morning. An unusual mix of stakeholders who will come before our committee today, and I'm interested to see the recommendations that this group will offer us. From what I understand, it is a consensus blueprint to help guide future action on climate change legislation for this committee. And the vagueness of the report is an example of the nuances that exist in crafting policy to control consumer energy use without further damaging our economy, which is already under some strain. One of the leaders in the energy industry today, who's unfortunately not going to be with us, Rex Tillerson from ExxonMobil, was in Washington last week. Mr. Tillerson suggested that a carbon tax would be the fair and equitable way to transparently control carbon emissions. I think our former chairman in the last session, the last Congress, Mr. Dingell, also had a similar recommendation. When you have an industry leader asking for an additional tax burden to simply provide a better environment for his long-term investments and business planning, begin to appreciate some of the pressure that the CEOs are under to continue to increase revenue in such a strained economic environment. They need transparency, they need clarification to compensate for the unexpected volatility in their marketplace. Unfortunately, clarity is not part of this 30-page report released from embargo by USCAP this morning. Somewhat vague on implementation, it's very complex in plan and would require new and integrated systems development. And that costs money and increases the number of variables in the regime. As we've seen in the financial industry, sophistication, complexity, increased variables add distortions and volatility to the market. Not to mention, variables and complexity add the opportunity for manipulation and would require a strong federal regulator, and that's an additional burden on the U.S. taxpayers, further strain on our federal budget. If I had the opportunity, I would ask these individuals here today the following questions. Would a carbon tax provide a clearer signal that industry is asking for? And is it a comparable alternative to what's been outlined in this report? And secondly, do you think the implementation of this report will help turn profits and increase domestic economic activity? And are you willing to step down from your position if it does not? Has the economic downturn already slowed, stopped, and reduced carbon emissions, which makes the recommendations in this report unnecessary? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying I look forward to working with you as our new chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Over the years, I've known you to be a tireless defender of public health and environment and qualities that will serve our committee well as we begin to tackle the many critical issues facing our nation. It's timely that our first full committee hearing this Congress focuses on U.S. Climate Action Partnership, especially since the blueprint for the legislative action was just released this morning. President-elect Barack Obama has signaled that his administration will lead the world toward a new era of global cooperation on climate change. To be truly successful, any efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions must be global in nature and must result from extensive buy-in in a range of diverse U.S. stakeholders, from our industrial base to the consumers who pay the bills. That's what makes the efforts of USCAP so important. USCAP members from utilities and environmental groups came together to form a call for action to reverse greenhouse gas emissions, and today I hope to learn specifics about the USCAP new blueprint for legislative action. And I commend them for attempting the difficult task of compromise on such a complex issue. And I look forward to the testimony. Following up on my colleague from Texas, and I also read the statement last week by the CEO of Exxon, and I guess our committee and the Congress has got a tough decision because I have some concerns about cap and trade, because if you do just have a carbon tax, people know how much it is. The industry can produce using that, and as consumers we know. Whereas with the cap and trade, it's always changing. And I have to admit, with our most recent economic crisis with mortgage trading and slicing and dicing things, how much money was taken out of the market. I'm a little concerned about a cap and trade, and I hope that the panel will talk about that, as compared to just a straight-up carbon tax that, again, it's tough to get the votes for in Congress, but it's also it's probably also the cleanest and most transparent thing that Congress can do, and just put a tax on what we shouldn't be putting in our atmosphere. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you again for holding our first hearing on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Ms. Schakowsky?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. The science is clear. Global climate change is real and poses an immediate threat to our planet and our way of life. The 2007 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change unequivocally found that our climate is warming and that the primary cause of this warming is due to human activities. And in some ways, it's a relief to have arrived at this point where there is such a great consensus in the scientific community, and now as we move forward in the policy-making community to address this problem. I think for years we have squandered the time by arguing over whether this is real or not real and how we should move. Human-caused pollution has already caused drastic changes to the world's ecosystem. If emissions continue unabated, our nation and the world will continue to experience unprecedented weather patterns resulting in heat waves, droughts, wildfires, floods, public health threats, and the extinction of thousands of plant and animal species. This crisis warrants immediate policy response. I've heard some of my colleagues talk about moving slowly, moving carefully. I don't think those are the same things. I think we definitely need to move carefully, but I also think we need to move swiftly and boldly. The longer we wait, the harder and more costly it will be to limit climate change. And therefore, I think, Mr. Chairman, it sends an excellent message that our first committee hearing of the year is on this important topic. And I'm very grateful that the panel is here today. I hope we do have a robust discussion of their recommendations. I, for one, am a bit concerned about the pace that is recommended here. When they have a little chart about emission reduction targets, it looks like what they're saying is, the way it reads, is that there would be an 80% reduction of 2005 levels of emissions by 2050. I think that is inadequate. I think we have to be talking more like an 80% reduction of 1990 levels, and that we're going to have to move more swiftly to address these problems. Others of my colleagues have said things like government shouldn't pick winners and losers in the energy arena. Well, that's exactly what we have done for generations, is pick winners and losers. The winners being the big oil companies, the nuclear industry. Government has always made decisions about the most judicious way to achieve our policy goals in terms of helping industry. And now I think it will be our obligation to make sure that those, that we create systems that will encourage the most efficient ways to reduce pollution and save our planet, be available in the marketplace. In the weeks and months ahead, we must continue to work together with the players that are going to be here on this panel and with all the different interests within our own Congress to put forward the most aggressive proposal possible to solve this imminent crisis. So again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you so much for holding this hearing and look forward to working with you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Schakowsky. Mr. Sarbanes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing. I'm looking forward to serving on the committee and serving under your leadership with respect to this and many other issues. This is the most pressing issue of our time, really of any time, and it's fitting that we're having the hearing so early in the session, and look forward to hearing from these witnesses from USCAP. I wanted to just cite some statistics about what could happen to the Chesapeake Bay. I hail from Maryland, and Chesapeake Bay is clearly a treasure for our state and for the region, but also a national treasure. And to recount some of the projections of what would happen if we don't take the steps we need to with respect to global warming as it would affect the Chesapeake Bay, I think really bring this home. According to a report by the National Wildlife Federation, if we continue on our current course and fail to reduce carbon emissions, and this assumes an increase in 3 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century, global warming would cause the loss of, with respect to the Chesapeake Bay, more than 167,000 acres of undeveloped dry land, 58% of the beaches along the ocean coasts, 69% of estuarine beaches along the bay, more than half of the region's tidal swamps, and wetland habitats would be replaced by more than 266,000 acres of open water, which is equal to about 415 square miles. This would be cataclysmic. And this is just one example of the effects of not addressing global warming. What I'm curious to learn more about from this report, from the panel's discussion today, and from other hearings that we'll have on the topic, is whether the targets for reducing emissions, which are being set forth according to certain time frames, actually correlate to the degree to which we have to slow, stop, and then reverse the global warming trend overall, because we can become seduced by the targets for reducing carbon emissions without necessarily linking them to the pace at which we actually have to stop global warming and reverse global warming. And it may be that the targets set are not aggressive enough, as the Congresswoman just indicated. Bringing the market into this enterprise, which is what the recommendation here is of USCAP, is obviously critical. That alone can't do it. I think we're going to have a hybrid approach in order to achieve the levels of reduction that we seek and that are going to make a real difference. So there needs to be a multi-pronged approach. But more than anything, what should come from this hearing and others that we have on the topic is the urgency with which we need to move with respect to reducing global warming and reducing our carbon emissions. We really don't have any time to wait, and humans are, of course, very capable of delaying on all fronts. And so we've got to move quickly. We've got to move quickly as policymakers. I know this committee is going to be critical to doing that, and I thank you for holding the hearing today.
Thank you, Mr. Sarbanes. Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it relates to this hearing today, clearly this is going to be a topic that this committee will deal with during this Congress and spend a lot of time on. I do wish we could have had more time to look at the partnership proposal before we had a hearing on the proposal. Certainly, as we look at energy this year, my view has been and will continue to be that we need to find more of it, to find more American energy, to use less of it, and to invest in the future. One of my concerns as we approach this topic of climate change is that we want to be sure that we're investing in the future in a way that doesn't cost jobs and opportunity and creates new jobs and new opportunities at the same time. You know, even if we knew, Mr. Chairman, where we were going to be in terms of the best way to power the economy 25 years from now, I'm not sure that it would, as a matter of fact, I'm absolutely confident it would not be wise to try to get there in 5 years. To see the transition in the economy that could occur in a way that cost American jobs and cost American opportunity would be a huge mistake. We're all concerned about passing along a strong economy and a strong environment. I know that we have many different views on this committee as to whether or not we're in global warming caused by human activity or we're in the climate change activities that have happened throughout the history of the planet. Clearly, there's always been climate change. I think there's a rush to determine that somehow the current climate changes are caused by things that we can impact in a significant way by immediate action. There's less debate about whether the wrong immediate actions would create lost jobs and lost economic opportunity. This needs to be dealt with in the most thoughtful possible way. I don't disagree at all with the previous comments that what we can do quickly, we need to do quickly, but I do disagree that everything should be done in the quickest possible time frame. Everything should be done in a time frame that makes sense for American families, for the American environment, but also for the American competitive position in the world. And those are some of the topics that I'm sure we'll cover in this hearing today. Obviously, we have lots of nameplates in front of us, so if everybody who's going to be testifying gives a 5-minute opening statement, everybody that would like to ask questions of this panel today won't be able to ask all the questions we'd like to ask, but clearly this is the launching point for what will be an important debate in this committee, an important debate in this country, and will have massive impact on the future of American opportunity if we make the wrong decisions. And so, Mr. Chairman, again, let me thank you for the way you got the committee started yesterday. I look forward to working with you personally. I know that this topic of environment and energy is one that our ranking member, Mr. Barton, has spent an incredible amount of time on, as I have and others have, and we are eager for the right opportunities to discuss what the future should look like for the American environment and American energy, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blunt. I've asked Mr. Barton and Mr. Markey and Mr. Upton to hold off on their opening statements along with my opening statement before we hear immediately from the witnesses. But I want to ask if any member wishes to make, other than the four that I mentioned, wishes to make an opening statement at this time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Did you ask for unanimous consent? I was talking.
No, I was asking if any member wishes to make an opening statement. If not, I would ask unanimous consent that when we reconvene at 10:30, that opening statements, the only opening statements we will have will come from the chairman, the ranking member of the full committee, the chairman, and the ranking member of the Energy and Environment Subcommittee.
Reserving the right to object.
Gentleman's recognized in his reservation.
First, let me say that you've just had one of your members come in, so we may want to give him a right to make an open statement.
We certainly will.
But I will not object to the unanimous consent request, but I want to make the point that in discussions about this proceeding, I encouraged you to begin early so that members that wish to make opening statements could, and you were agreeable to that. I think we have shown this morning that opening statements are a positive part of a hearing record, and I hope that in the future, although we've changed the rules so that opening statements at hearings are now at the discretion of the chair, that you will continue to work with me and others so that we give members that wish to an opportunity to make an opening statement, because I do think it's important that that we have members that are allowed to do that. And this committee, although it may be one of the few committees that still allows it, has always allowed every member on both sides of the aisle the opportunity to give some sort of an opening statement, maybe a 1-minute or a 3-minute before we begin the hearing process. So I want to thank you, even though it's now discretionary because of our rule change, that you did use your discretion to start the hearing early so that we could have opening statements, and I hope we continue that discretion.
Gentlemen, we yield. You've certainly made this point very clear to me, and I'm open to it, and we'll try to work together.
Okay.
I have a unanimous consent request pending. I'd like to revise it by saying that if the two members that just joined us wish to make opening statements, they be permitted to do so at this time. Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I certainly apologize for being late. I've figured out a lot of things since I've been in Washington. One I haven't figured out is how to be in 2 places at one time, so thank you very much for recognizing me. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Barton, we certainly have an historic opportunity in this Congress and in this committee to revolutionize our energy and environmental policy. Accomplishing the monumental task of passing and implementing energy reform demands bipartisanship in this body and cooperation between the actors involved in the crafting of the policy, which certainly includes our witnesses today from USCAP. Transformation of our attitude to one of cooperation in recognition of a common problem is sorely needed, not only to combat the climate change crisis, but to mobilize every sector of our society to participate in the process to make us more economically and environmentally secure. It is certainly our responsibility to confront these issues aggressively but prudently, recognizing that in our policy there will be winners, there will be losers. The poorest among us, those who are least responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, will be the losers in nearly any iteration of policy that puts a price on carbon. When crafting our policy, Mr. Chairman, to curb emissions, we must mitigate the rising cost of energy on Americans poor, who contributed the least to the problem and can least afford to bear the weight of a costly solution. And so I thank the witnesses today for their efforts to find consensus among diverse actors and eagerly anticipate the opportunity we have in the coming months to effect change. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Murphy, do you wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
How much
time is it? How much time, Mr. Chairman?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, thank you. I thank you not only for the opportunity to make an opening statement, but you recognize the importance of members speaking to these issues. Earlier this morning, I had a chance to go over to the Senate Hart Building and listen to some of the presentations of the United States Climate Action Partnership and had a preview of some of the important things they'll be saying today. As we look at this as members of Congress, I hope that this committee can add some other elements to this. Certainly we all want clean air and clean water and clean land for coming generations, even if there are still disputes about climate change. We need to join our hands together when it comes to making sure we keep this planet clean for following generations. But it's important as we look at these issues, we're also addressing them from the standpoint of how we do this on a global perspective and not just a local perspective. The United States has lost hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of jobs in manufacturing over the years. Some of it as technologies have changed, but some of it also has come from jobs moving overseas, where there are not the same pollution controls or expectations, where products can be made cheaper because they pay lower wages and don't have legacy costs or health or other elements there. But in the area of producing energy in clean and efficient ways, it is ones that we have to look at in a global perspective. I look at my area of Pittsburgh as an example. Pittsburgh in the 1800s was referred to by Charles Dickens as hell with the lid off. It continued to be a highly polluting area where people understood if they went to work, even white-collar workers, they brought a couple shirts to work and they would change them a couple times during the day because of the soot that was left on their clothes. Health problems and that sort of dirtiness were seen as part of life, yet Pittsburgh underwent amazing transitions where now it is really a model of a city of how things have cleaned up. We have bass fishing tournaments now in the rivers that were once ones where nothing seemed to live. We also have to understand, however, that part of the cost of that came that steel left Pittsburgh. We have a great team called the Steelers, but quite frankly, I don't think steel is made anywhere within the city limits of Pittsburgh anymore. We've replaced it with other things. There was great companies that are headquartered such as U.S. Steel and other steel manufacturers, but they make that steel throughout the world now. We also are noting that U.S. Steel made a tremendous investment in its Clairton Coke Works by investing over $1 billion to make sure that coke, which is, you can make steel without coal, but to make sure that that pollution is reduced here too. We applaud them for that. But what happens in other countries with regard to how they make steel, how they make manufactured products, and how they make the energy to make those products is of concern. Developing countries like China and India emit an estimated 2.5 to 5.0 metric tons of CO2 emissions per metric ton of crude steel. The United States averages 1.2 metric ton of CO2 emissions per metric ton of crude steel. Cutting emissions in the U.S. has been done, but carbon emissions in other countries is 2 to 4 times that amount. That being the case, if we simply say that a cap and trade program in this country will be looked at, And companies are allowed to or will continue to move their factories overseas to make their raw goods and their parts where cap and trade does not apply, we have done nothing to clean up this planet. Nothing. In fact, we've just played this massive shell game by saying, we'll make these heavy industry parts in other countries, ship them back over here, put them together, and say we cleaned up our area. We have done no such thing. We have to make sure that whatever we do for carbon emissions and other pollution areas, that we do this on a global perspective if we're going to do this at all. I'm tired of seeing our jobs go over to China. I'm tired of continuing to fund both sides in the war on terror with sending things over to the Mideast when we can do so much here with our rich talent. So I hope that we all, as colleagues, join together then in seeing what we can do with the United States being a leader in bringing other nations to the table on this. We have to have solutions. We cannot afford to not have solutions. We cannot afford to ignore this, and we cannot afford to simply shuffle the jobs off to other countries and turn away and pretend we did something meaningful. With that, I yield back. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Welch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. My opening statement is I'm glad to be here and look forward to working with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Seeing no other members who wish to be recognized at this time for an opening statement, he just went. Seeing no other members who wish to be recognized for an opening statement other than the four that I mentioned earlier, the unanimous consent request before us is to recess until 10:30, at which point we will hear from the chairman and ranking member, the full committee chairman and ranking member of the subcommittee, and the witnesses that are before us. Without objection, that'll be the order. We'll recess for another 5 or 6 minutes. Meeting of the committee will please come to order. I'm pleased to welcome you all here today for the first hearing of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the 111th Congress. We're holding this hearing on one of the most important issues Congress will face. It will, it's okay, just leave it there. It concerns our children's future, our economic future, and our security as a nation. It is also about responding to the economic crisis we face. Today, we're going to hear from some of our nation's most prominent leaders in business and environmental community. These diverse leaders have come together in the U.S. Climate Action Partnership to call for legislation to reduce the threat of global warming. They recognize that the key to a revitalized economy and our long-term prosperity as a nation lies in addressing climate change and transitioning to a clean energy economy. We are struggling with a grave economic crisis. Many Americans have already lost their jobs, their homes, their retirement savings. Many more are worried about their economic future. As Congress acts to address the immediate crisis, we must also lay the foundation for sustained long-term economic growth and security. Our environment and our economy depend on congressional action to confront the threat of climate change and secure our energy independence. U.S. industries want to invest in a clean energy future, but uncertainty about whether, when, and how greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced is deterring these vital investments. Companies are caught in a dilemma. They are reluctant to invest in old polluting technologies because they know that tougher regulations are inevitable. But they can't invest in new, cleaner technologies until they know what Congress is going to require. Our job is to extend to these industries a way to end the regulatory limbo and set our nation on a responsible path for reducing climate change and achieving energy independence. Our committee will be acting quickly and decisively to reduce global warming and end our dependence on foreign oil. My goal as chairman is to pass a comprehensive climate and energy legislation in the committee before the Memorial Day recess. That's an ambitious schedule, but it's an achievable one. We cannot afford another year of delay. As of today's hearing, we will show through the testimony a consensus is developing that our nation needs climate legislation. Our job is to transform this consensus into effective legislation. The legislation must be based on the science and meet the very serious threats we face. We're fortunate that Ed Markey, one of the most experienced legislators in Congress, will be chairing the Energy and Environment Subcommittee. We're also fortunate that we have so many skilled and knowledgeable members on both sides of the aisle on this committee. Finding a consensus is not always easy, but I know that with the leadership that we will be able to have in our subcommittee and from other members, we can succeed. Climate change, energy independence, and health care are going to be the committee's highest priority. Passage of the Children's Health Bill yesterday was a down payment on health reform. Today's hearing starts our work on climate change and energy independence. We'll be working on both issues at the same time. I welcome our distinguished witnesses, look forward to their testimony, but first we're going to hear from the ranking member of the full committee, the chairman, and the ranking member of the subcommittee. Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I give my statement, I want to make sure that we have on the record members will be allowed, time permitting, to ask questions of the witnesses, and if time does not permit, we will be able to give written questions that that answers will be submitted for the record. Is that
without objection, that will be a unanimous consent request that will be adopted. Any objections? Hearing none, that will be the order.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very willing to work with you and others on the committee to try to accomplish the goal that you just announced. I think it's good for the new chairman to have goals, and that's certainly a worthy goal. Having said that, I want to make a couple of comments that are cautionary. First, several of our members in their opening statements earlier before the panel got here indicated that the science is settled on climate change. The science is not settled. This is not a hearing to debate the science, so I won't do that. I would point out, though, until Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, the science was settled that the earth was flat. I will also point out that until the mid-1800s, the science was settled that if somebody was sick, you bled them. And as late as the mid-1940s, the science was settled that airplanes couldn't exceed the speed of sound. Science has a way of being settled, the status quo that turns out not to be. What I will say is the science is settled that CO2 concentrations are increasing in the atmosphere. That's a true statement. I will also stipulate that in some parts of the globe, temperatures are going up. I'm still not sure what average world temperature means. To me, what's more important is what's the temperature in Arlington, Texas, at a time certain and a place certain. But having said that, until you show me one of these UN models that can predict the past with at least 50% accuracy, much less the future, I'm not going to stipulate that the science is settled. Having said that, we're here today because we've got a distinguished list of panelists who have joined together to come up with a matrix on how to help our environmental and our economic issues. And they are distinguished. I know at least 2/3 of them personally, and I will stipulate that they're all men and women of honor and integrity. One of the things that they say in their statement of principles is that they want a plan that's economically viable. Let me just read the stock prices of the witnesses today that are before us. We have the CEO of ConocoPhillips. His stock price a year ago was $75.15 a share. It closed yesterday at $48.82. That's a 35% reduction. Duke Energy, Mr. Rogers is with us. His stock price a year ago was $20.05. It closed yesterday at $14.89. That's a decline of 26%. Mr. John Rowe, who represents Exelon, his stock price a year ago was $77.49. It closed yesterday at $52.84. That's a decrease of 32%. Mr. Crane, who represents NRG, $40.99, $23.17 yesterday, minus 43%. General Electric, one of the bedrocks of American industry, $35.27 a year ago, $13.87. That's a decline of 61%. Unfortunately, I own some of that stock, so I want our GE folks to get with the program here. Rio Tinto, $402.09, closed yesterday at $81.52, a decline of 80%. Siemens closed yesterday 61% off. P&M, Mr. Sturba, who has got a new hairdo, I see, $20.09 a year ago, $10.31 yesterday, a decline of 49%. And the winner, in terms of least decline, is Pacific Gas and Electric, Mr. Darby. Their stock a year ago was $44.22. Yesterday, it was $36.52, which is a decline of only 17%. There must be something about the California economy, Mr. Chairman, that is helping, or maybe Mr. Darby is just an unbelievably excellent leader. My point is, there's not one CEO here today whose stock price is even close to what it was a year ago. We're in a very serious economic recession, and you cannot tell me that if we adopt one of their principles of a mandatory cap and trade program on CO2 emissions for our economy, that it's going to help their stock prices. Now, a stock price is an inelegant value of the whole economy. I understand that. But we should be about protecting jobs, creating jobs. If we can do things, Mr. Chairman, that improve energy efficiency, if we get more energy or we get more output for less energy, and there's an environmental benefit consequently because of that, that's a good thing. But if we say we have to do things to lessen CO2 regardless of the economic consequences, in my opinion, that's a bad thing. So I think we should start with solutions that work. Mr. Boucher has a bill that is an R&D program for CO2 carbon capture, conversion, and sequestration. There's consensus on both sides of the aisle that that bill is a good first step. We should move that bill, Mr. Chairman. Then let's look at the experience in Europe of their cap-and-trade program, which is not working. And go from there. And last thing, we don't have the CEO of ExxonMobil here. I don't know if they're part of USCAP, but their CEO has come out and said, if we have to do something about carbon, let's have a carbon tax. Now, I'm not an advocate of a carbon tax, but I do believe that if you really, really, really want to reduce CO2, a carbon tax is the most efficient way to do it. And we should get with our friends at Ways and Means and give that some serious consideration. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. I do appreciate the witnesses being here. I've read the synopsis of their program, and I do agree with their conclusion that we want to do things that are sustainable, that protect the economy, and show that an American can be a world leader. I do agree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. Mr. Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. The coalition of American businesses and environmental groups before us today represents the evolution that has occurred on the issue of global warming. We have emerged from the last decade's primordial ooze of discord and delay on global warming action. We have now arrived on terra firma, where hard emissions reductions targets must supplant voluntary measures that aren't up to the job. And instead of struggling to stay afloat in a mire of skepticism, we're now poised to march forward with a new climate-friendly Obama administration and congressional leadership. But evolution will only take us so far on this issue. What we now need is legislative intelligent design. Now the hard task of enacting global warming legislation is before us. The witnesses here today, their shareholders and members, and a growing majority of Americans know that the key to our economic growth, national security, and planetary survival is to pass energy and climate legislation that will finally unleash the clean energy revolution that has been building for years. The CEOs that are testifying before us today are not here to harm shareholder value. They are here to help lay out a plan which will enhance shareholder value in the years ahead, to target where the economic growth opportunities are for our country, and to create the jobs that will employ Americans for this generation and generations to come. That is why they are here. They understand the problems better than any that our country is faced with today economically. Our country has been hit by an economic tsunami. At the same time, we are feeling the early effects of a climate storm that is growing stronger and approaching faster than predicted just a few years ago. Comprehensive, clean energy and climate legislation is the solution to both of these problems, and it is a solution for the whole country. High-tech hubs like Massachusetts and sunny California will benefit, but so will steel workers in Pennsylvania and former Maytag manufacturing workers in Iowa who are building blades for wind turbines. And ranchers in Texas and South Dakota are seeing their relentless winds turned into revenue with every turn of the wind turbines sprouting on their lands. Last year, I introduced ICAP, the Investing in Climate Action and Protection Act, as my contribution to the climate policy discussion. Many of the core ideas of ICAP are reflected in the discussion draft put forward by Chairman Dingell and Chairman Boucher this past October. And many are consistent with the blueprint issued by the U.S. Climate Action Partnership today. Those developments bode well for the work before us. And I look forward to working with you, Chairman Waxman, chosen newly as the chairman, because you have shown such tremendous leadership on this issue. I look forward to working with the other members of the committee, the administration, and the American people to enact climate legislation that will save our economy and protect the planet. As the new chairman of the Energy and Environment Subcommittee, I am committed to moving a bill as quickly as possible in partnership with Chairman Waxman and all of the members, bipartisan, Democrat and Republican, so that we can, as quickly as possible, deal with this issue, because the urgency of the problem demands swift action. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very appropriate that you made this the first hearing, and the quality of this first panel represents the magnitude of this issue, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markey. Mr. Upton?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just hope that this hearing is not necessarily a sign of things to come. I can remember when Republicans took the majority in the 90s, and I can remember sage advice given by my friend Mr. Markey, who said that we ought to have, as a subcommittee chairman of oversight and then telco, his advice that we would not have more than one panel, and not more than 6 or 7 witnesses, and always allow the minority to have an equal say in terms of the folks on that panel. And admittedly, we have one panel today, but we have far more than 6 or 7, and I'm not sure that the minority was afforded the opportunity to, in fact, insist on a couple different witnesses. I also wish that we had received this blueprint earlier than this morning. Clearly, it was printed before today. Would have been nice to at least have taken it home last night to be able to digest some of the summaries and the information rather than get it thrust at us literally at 9 o'clock this morning over in the Cannon building. But I would confess that climate change is real. I recognize that we have a problem, and in fact, we do need to take action. I've never been a fan of cap and trade. We're fortunate to look at the EU's failure and their inability to reduce global gas emissions. Climate change policy must adhere to a number of different common sense principles. It must provide a tangible environmental benefit to the American people. It has to advance technology and provide the opportunity for export. It has to protect American jobs. It has to strengthen U.S. energy security. And it does require global participation. Now, I'll support legislation. I won't support legislation that doesn't meet those standards. In my state of Michigan, things are really, really tough. Our governor told us last week that our unemployment offices across the state are fielding 100,000 calls an hour. By design, a cap-and-trade approach works by increasing energy costs and slowing down economic growth. We can't afford that in Michigan. And as a former member of this committee from the other side of the aisle, Sherrod Brown, now a senator from the state of Ohio, during the Senate cap-and-trade debate last year, sent a letter to Majority Leader Reid, who said, and I'm quoting directly from his letter, that cap-and-trade programs developed in the Lieberman-Warner bill have the potential to raise over $7 trillion. Much of those funds will be indirectly paid for by consumers through increased energy prices. I think he had it right, and that the only consensus achieved during that Senate debate was that the cap-and-trade approach was not appropriate. Rather than making energy more expensive, hurting our fragile economy, and sending American jobs overseas, we need to be pursuing an approach that promotes and encourages clean energy, builds economic strength through exporting American technology, and thus creates jobs rather than exporting them. And I propose instead of setting an arbitrary cap that isn't linked to tangible global greenhouse gas reductions or a recognizable drop in global temperatures, that we should begin working on a clean energy policy that spurs investments in that technology and American jobs. More nuclear. We need to invest in clean coal technologies like carbon capture. We need to invest more in wind and solar and other renewables like hydro. And we need more conservation. We must take an sector-by-sector approach that cultivates innovations in technology and efficiency rather than arbitrary government mandates. And we must meet our increasing energy demands as our economy begins to move forward and recover from this recession that we've been in, particularly in Michigan, for a long, long time. And you can't exclude China or India. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the presentation and the questions that we'll be able to afford ourselves both in person as well as in writing. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Upton. Today we're honored to have with us 14 chief executive officers and presidents of a broad range of businesses and leading environmental organizations, all of whom are here as members of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, or USCAP. USCAP is a coalition of over 30 businesses and leading environmental groups with the common purpose of urging Congress to enact climate change legislation promptly. And I would note that two other members, Alcoa and Deere & Company, had been invited to testify and ultimately were unable to do so. This is truly a distinguished panel, and I could spend a great deal of time discussing their accomplishments and their portfolios and their stock prices, but I think that since the purpose of this hearing is to hear from them and time is short, I'll forego a full introduction. Joining us today are Jonathan Lash, President of World Resources Institute, James Mulva, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of ConocoPhillips, George Nolan, President and Chief Executive Officer of Siemens Corporation, Fred Krupp, President of Environmental Defense Fund, John Rowe, President and Chief Executive Officer of Exelon Corporation, David Crane, President and Chief Executive Officer of NRG Energy, Preston Chiaro, Chief Executive Officer of Rio Tinto, Jeffrey Immelt, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of General Electric, Francis Beinecke, President of Natural Resources Defense Council, Jim Rogers, Chairman, President, Chief Executive Officer of Duke Energy, Peter Darby, Chairman, CEO, and President of PG&E Corporation, Eileen Clausen, President of the Pew Center on Global Climate Change, Mark Tursick, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Nature Conservancy, and Jeffrey Sturba, Chairman and CEO and President of PNM Resources. As I understand it, we're going to hear from 6 witnesses. No, in agreement with the witnesses, 6 witnesses will have waived their opening statement, and we thank them for their understanding. For the remainder, we'll hear 2-minute oral statements from each, and we have written statements from all of the witnesses, which we will enter into the record. I would like to also forewarn members, which I've mentioned this before, that some members of the panel will have to meet prior engagements this afternoon with the incoming administration. And as Mr. Barton and I have discussed, when this group of witnesses needs to leave, they will leave behind a group of designated replacements who will stay until we have finished with all questions from all the members who wish to ask questions. We're going to start a new policy in this committee that all witnesses that testify before us do so under oath. So I'd like to ask you, if you would, now that you're comfortably seated, to please stand and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear and affirm that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth and nothing but the truth, and the whole truth? Thank you. As the record will indicate, each of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. We'll turn to our first witness for a statement, Mr. Immelt from General Electric.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and Ranking Member Barton, members of the committee, good morning, and it's an honor to be here this morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Jeff Immelt, Chairman of GE. I understand we might have gotten off on the wrong foot this morning. I want to apologize for any process difficulties or misunderstandings we had, but we are honored, and we look to being responsive. We've been briefed on what the opening comments were, and please know directly from all of us that there is no intention to be disrespectful in any manner. We are here to be helpful in this process. So let me say that from the outset. We launched a clean energy initiative in GE about 5 years ago. Here's what we've learned so far. We've reduced our own carbon footprint from where we were in 2004 by 8% between now and then. That represents about $100 million savings per year. So in an industrial setting, we've taken it on internally to great results. We've invested approximately $3 billion in clean energy R&D each year over that time period. That has generated $17 billion in 2008 revenue, 20% annual growth. Ranking Member Barton, if this was our only business, our stock price would be doing much better right now. This is actually a great place to invest. And we've created competitiveness. 20% of our jobs inside GE are tied to green products. and that pulls with it another 60,000 supplier jobs. We're a net exporter of these products, so we view this as being a core of our global competitiveness. So that's just a background of how I've come here. I represent, and we've all come together as the members of U.S. Climate Action Partnership. Each one will go through some of the aspects of the blueprint that we've introduced today, but I would just make maybe 4 points at a very high level. One is that we really have gathered together a very diverse group of leaders. We represent industrial customers, utilities, car companies, oil companies. We really have tried to put together a representative segment of the industrial complex in the United States, as well as having some of the leading NGOs in this field and experts over a long period of time. The second point I'd make is that what we try to do is a balanced and integrated approach with the understanding that economics are important, that solving the environmental issues are important, and we've tried to link in the proposal the right trade-offs, that should be considered as we go forward with this kind of legislation. I'd say the third thing that we've tried to do is represent and cap and trade a market-based approach for pricing carbon that we think over the long term will stimulate technology and make that a tremendous source of great strength as we go forward. The last comment that I would make is that we've always viewed U.S. Climate Action Partnership as a catalyst for change. We don't think we have all the answers. We think this is a starting point that can be built on, and please accept that in the spirit with which that's given. We are people trying to solve what we view as a problem, trying to turn that into an opportunity, and trying to do that in the context of being good citizens and being constructive in this dialogue. So thank you very much, and I'll turn this over to Jim Rogers.